Pay attention to this woman on the ground in the garage. Her name is Gia Troutman. She's 24 years old. She's been shot 4 times. Her legs are numb. She can't stand. And when deputies arrive at this house in Florida on this Thursday night, they find her bleeding in the driveway, dragging herself toward help, while her boyfriend Matthew Wright lies dead inside the garage with a gunshot wound to his head. But here's what makes this case devastating. 47 minutes before deputies arrived, Gia called Matthew's sister Alice. She was locked in the garage. She was terrified. She begged Alice to come help her. She said, "Please hurry. Please come. He's trying to kill me. He has me locked in the garage." And Alice said, "Okay, we on our way," and never came. Never called 911, never rushed over. Just said okay in a voice Gia would later describe as nonchalant as fuck. Within those 47 minutes, Gia would be shot 4 times. Matthew would be found dead. And when Bodycam footage captured the scene, when investigators started piecing together what happened, everyone had the same question. Did Matthew shoot Gia and then kill himself? Or did something else happen in that? This is the story of 47 minutes that changed everything. And when you see the Bodycam footage, when you hear both sides of the story, when you understand what Alice didn't do when her brother's girlfriend begged for help, you'll never trust someone's promise to help the same way. Gia Troutman was 24 years old in 2024. She'd grown up in a small town in Florida, raised by parents who worked hard to provide for their 3 children. Gia was the middle child, with an older brother who'd joined the military and a younger sister still in high school. She was close with her family, the kind of person who called her mom every few days just to chat, who showed up for family dinners on Sundays, who remembered everyone's birthdays. She'd graduated high school in 2018 with decent grades, but no clear direction. College felt overwhelming and expensive, so she'd started working retail instead. She'd worked at various stores over the years, currently at a clothing retailer in a local mall. The pay wasn't great, but she was good with customers, good at making sales, reliable enough that management had started training her for a supervisor position. Gia was pretty in an understated way. Long dark hair she usually wore down or in a simple ponytail, brown eyes, average height. She didn't wear a lot of makeup, didn't need to. She had an easy smile that made customers trust her, that made friends gravitate toward her. She'd dated a few guys in high school in her early 20s, nothing serious. She'd been single for about 6 months when she met Matthew Wright in early 2023. They'd met through mutual friends at a party. Matthew was 26, worked as a DoorDash driver, had his own place, seemed stable and decent. Their early relationship was even sweet. Matthew was attentive, interested in her life, affectionate. He texted her good morning every day. He brought her coffee at work sometime. He remembered little details about things she'd told him, like her favorite TV shows or the fact that she was allergic to shellfish. These small gestures made Gia feel valued, cared for. They became official after about 2 months of dating. Matthew changed his Facebook status to, "in a relationship with Gia Troutman." Gia did the same. They posted photos together. Dinner dates, movie nights, hiking trips. To anyone looking at their social media, they seemed like a happy young couple figuring out life together. Gia's family liked Matthew at first. He was polite when he met her parents. He asked her dad about his work, complimented her mom's cooking, played video games with her younger sister. He seemed like a good guy, a little quiet maybe, but nice enough. Gia moved into Matthew's house about 4 months into the relationship. It seemed fast to her parents, but Gia was 24, an adult, making her own decisions. Matthew's house was small but comfortable, better than the apartment Gia had been sharing with roommates. And financially, splitting rent and bills made sense. For a few months after moving in together, things continued to be good. They fell into domestic routines. Matthew would do his DoorDash deliveries during dinner hours when tips were best. Gia would work her retail shifts, usually during the day. They'd come home, cook dinner together, watch TV, go to bed. Normal couple stuff. But around month 6 of the relationship, subtle changes started appearing. Matthew began asking more questions about Gia's day. Who did she talk to at work? Any male customers flirt with her? Why did her shift run late? These questions seemed like interest at first, like he cared about her day. But gradually they felt more like interrogation. Matthew started checking Gia's phone. At first he asked, making it seem casual, "Can I see your phone? I want to look something up and mine's dead." Then he'd scroll through her messages while looking up whatever he'd needed. Later he stopped asking, just picked up her phone when she wasn't paying attention. Entering her passcode, he'd watched her type dozens of times. When Gia confronted him about going through her phone without permission, Matthew got defensive. He said if she had nothing to hide, Why did it matter? He said relationships should be transparent, that couples shouldn't keep secrets. He said his ex-girlfriend had cheated on him, that he'd been hurt before, that he just needed reassurance that Gia wasn't like that. Gia felt guilty. She understood being hurt by a past relationship. She understood needing reassurance, so she told herself Matthew's insecurity was understandable, that once he learned to trust her, the phone checking would stop. But it didn't stop. It got worse. Matthew installed a tracking app on Gia's phone, claiming it was for safety, so he'd know where she was if something happened. But he used it obsessively, checking her location multiple times a day. If she deviated from expected routes, driving to a different store or stopping at a friend's house, he'd text immediately asking where she was and why. Gia's friends started noticing the relationship wasn't healthy. Her best friend Sarah told her Matthew seemed controlling, that the constant texting and tracking wasn't normal. But Gia defended him. She said Sarah didn't understand, that Matthew had trauma from his past, that he just needed time to feel secure. Around month 8, the first physical incident occurred. Gia had gone out with friends for dinner. She'd told Matthew she'd be home by 10 p.m., but dinner ran late. The restaurant was slow with service, and she didn't get home until 10:45. Matthew was furious. He accused her of lying about where she'd been, said she was probably with another man. When Gia tried to explain about the slow service, tried to show him the restaurant receipt proving where she'd been, Matthew grabbed her arm roughly, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. He apologized immediately after, said he didn't mean to hurt her, that he'd just been so worried, that the thought of losing her made him crazy. He cried. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face, saying he was sorry, he'd never hurt her again, he loved her so much. Gia forgave him. She'd never seen a man cry like that before. His remorse seemed genuine, and the bruises faded within a few days. She told herself it was a one-time thing, that the stress of his job and his past trauma had just bubbled over this once. But it wasn't a one-time. Over the next few months, Matthew hit Gia 3 more times during arguments. Never in the face where others would see. Always her arms, her shoulders, places she could cover with clothing, and always followed by immediate apologies, tears, promises it would never happen again. Gia stopped telling her friends about the relationship problems. She knew what they'd say, that she needed to leave, that abuse escalates, that men like this don't change. But Gia believed Matthew could change. She believed love could fix him. She believed if she was patient enough, understanding enough, perfect enough, he'd stop being jealous and violent. This is the trap of domestic violence. The victim starts believing it's somehow their responsibility to fix the abuser. That if they just behave correctly, if they don't trigger the jealousy, if they're good enough, the violence will stop. But violence isn't caused by the victim's behavior. It's caused by the abuser's choice to be violent. By Thursday, the day of the shooting, Gia and Matthew had been together for almost a year. To outsiders, they still looked like a normal couple. They still posted photos together occasionally. They still went out to dinner. Matthew still brought Gia coffee sometimes. The abuse was hidden, as it usually is. But behind closed doors, the relationship was deteriorating. Arguments were more frequent. Matthew's jealousy was consuming. He accused Gia of cheating almost daily, despite no evidence. He went through her phone constantly. He questioned every moment she wasn't directly with him. The emotional abuse was relentless, and Gia, after nearly a year of this, was exhausted. She'd started thinking about leaving. She'd started saving money secretly, hiding cash from her paychecks so she'd have enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. She'd started researching domestic violence resources. She knew she needed to get out. She just hadn't worked up the courage to actually do it yet. Thursday started as a normal day. Matthew left the house around noon for his DoorDash shift. Gia was off work that day. She spent the afternoon at home cleaning, watching TV, scrolling through her phone. Around 6 p.m., she went out to run errands. She went to a store. She talked to a friend. Normal activities. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that should have triggered what happened next. She came home around 8 p.m. Matthew was already home. His DoorDash shift finished. And immediately when she walked in, Gia knew something was wrong. Matthew's energy was off. He was tense. Angry. He started accusing her of cheating. Where had she been? Who was she with? Why was she gone so long? Gia tried to explain. She'd been running errands. She'd talked to a friend. She showed him her phone. She tried to prove she hadn't been doing anything wrong. But Matthew wasn't interested in proof. He was spiraling into jealous rage, the kind of rage that doesn't respond to logic or evidence. The argument escalated. Matthew started calling Gia names. Words meant to hurt, to demean. to make her feel small. Gia, exhausted from months of this pattern, snapped back. She called him names too. If he was going to accuse her of being unfaithful, if he was going to disrespect her, she wasn't going to just take it quietly anymore. That's when Matthew hit, not for the first time. He'd hit her before during arguments, but this time felt different. This time felt more dangerous. The look in his eyes, the way his body moved, everything about his energy told Gia that this wasn't going to be just a slap or a shove. This was going to be worse. Gia made a decision. She told Matthew she would leave. She would pack her things and go. She didn't want to fight anymore. She just wanted out of this situation before it got even more dangerous. Matthew's response was to start throwing her belongings around. He grabbed clothes from the closet and threw them on the floor. He grabbed her makeup and threw it in the garage. He was making a scene, making a mess, making it clear that if she wanted to leave, it wasn't going to be easy or peaceful. They moved into the garage. That's where most of her stuff had landed. Gia started gathering her things, trying to organize them enough to pack and leave. Matthew stood there watching her, still angry, still accusing, still calling her names. And then something shifted. The argument, which had been loud and heated, suddenly got quieter, more intense. Matthew's anger turned cold. He stopped yelling. He started speaking in a low, threatening voice. The kind of voice that makes your survival instincts scream danger. Gia realized she needed help. She was alone in this house with a man who was becoming increasingly unstable and violent. Her phone was in her pocket. She pulled it out, and she called the one person she thought might be able to talk Matthew down, the one person who knew him well enough to reach him when he was like this. She called his sister, Alice Wright. It was 8:47 p.m. when Gia's call connected to Alice's phone. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes would haunt Gia for the rest of her life. "Alice, you need to come here, right now. Please hurry. Please come." Gia's voice was urgent, scared, trying to convey the severity of the situation without saying too much, with Matthew standing right there listening. "Please hurry up and come. He's trying to kill me. He has me locked in the garage. He's trying to kill me." That's not an exaggeration. That's not a figure of speech. Gia, at 8:47 p.m. on this Thursday night, believed she was in mortal danger. She believed Matthew was going to kill her, and she was calling the person who should have cared most about both of them for help. Alice's response? "Okay, we on our way." That was it. No urgency, no follow-up questions, no, "What's happening?" No, "I'm calling the police right now." Just, "Okay, we on our way," in what Gia would later describe as the most nonchalant tone imaginable. Like Gia had called asking for a ride to the store, not begging for help because she feared for her life. Matthew heard the conversation. He heard Gia tell his sister he was trying to kill her. And instead of that shocking him into stopping, instead of that making him realize how far he'd gone, it seemed to push him further. "Was that my sister?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Yeah," Gia said. "It's too late. It's too late now. It's too late," Matthew said. His voice was calm, resigned, like he'd made a decision and was now committed to following through. "What you mean? What do you mean it's too late?" Gia asked, fear rising in her voice. But Matthew didn't answer. He just looked at her, and Gia, in that moment, knew that Alice wasn't coming, knew that no help was coming, knew that whatever was going to happen next, she was going to face it alone. 47 minutes. That's how long passed between Gia's desperate call for help and the moment police arrived. 47 minutes during which Alice never showed up, never called 911, never did anything except say, "Okay, we on our way," and then apparently decide that this emergency could wait. So what happened in those 47 minutes? Let's break it down minute by minute based on Gia's testimony, the 911 call timestamp, evidence at the scene, and forensic analysis. 8:47 p.m. Gia calls Alice from inside the garage. The call lasts 1 minute 43 seconds. Gia explicitly says, "He's trying to kill me. He has me locked in the garage." Alice responds, "Okay, we on our way," in what Gia describes as a nonchalant tone. The call ends. 8:49 p.m. Matthew asks Gia if that was his sister on the phone. Gia confirms yes. Matthew's response, "It's too late. It's too late now. It's too late." His tone is calm, resigned. He's made a decision. Gia asks what he means by too late, but Matthew doesn't elaborate. 8:50, 8:55 p.m. These 5 minutes are unclear in Gia's memory. She remembers Matthew moving around the garage. She remembers her legs starting to feel numb, a sensation she didn't understand at the time, but that may have been her body's fear response, adrenaline and stress causing physical symptoms. She remembers Matthew blocking her path to the doors. She remembers feeling trapped, genuinely trapped, knowing that Alice wasn't coming fast enough. 8:56 p.m. Matthew leaves the garage briefly. Gia hears him in the house, opening something, moving around. She considers trying to run, but her legs aren't working properly, and she knows she can't move fast enough. She considers screaming for help, but they live in a neighborhood where houses are spaced apart, and she's not sure anyone would hear. 8:58 p.m. Matthew returns to the garage. He's holding something small and dark. The gun. Gia sees it, and her blood runs cold. She's seen this gun before, knew Matthew owned it, but never thought he'd point it at her. Matthew, please. Don't do this. Please. Gia's voice is shaking. She's begging. She's trying to reason with someone who's beyond reason. Matthew doesn't respond. His face is blank, empty, like he's not really there anymore, like he's made a decision and shut down the part of his brain that would question it. 9 p.m. This is approximately when neighbors later report hearing what sounded like arguing or yelling from the direction of Matthew's house, though no one called police because domestic arguments in this neighborhood weren't unusual. 9:02 p.m. Matthew raises the gun, points it at Gia. She's sitting on the couch in the garage, the couch where they'd watched TV together on better nights, where she'd folded laundry while he played games on his phone, where she'd dozed off during late-night movie marathons. Now, it's the place where he's pointing a gun at her. 9:03 p.m. The first shot. It hits Gia in the leg. The pain is immediate, shocking, unlike anything she's ever felt. She screams. She tries to move, but her leg won't cooperate. Blood starts spreading on her jeans, dark and terrifying. 9:04 p.m. Second shot. Hits her other leg. More pain. More blood. Gia is sobbing now, begging Matthew to stop, trying to understand why this is happening. They fought. They'd fought before. But this? This was supposed to be impossible. 9:05 p.m. Third shot. Hits her abdomen. This one feels different, deeper, more dangerous. Gia feels wetness, feels warmth, knows this one is bad. She's having trouble breathing. Panic is setting in alongside the pain. 9:06 p.m. Fourth shot. Another hit to her leg or abdomen. Gia can't tell anymore because everything hurts. Everything is pain and blood and terror. She's pretty sure she's dying. She's pretty sure this is how her life ends. Shot by the man she loved in a garage at 24. 9:07 to 9:15 p.m. These 8 minutes are the hardest to reconstruct. Gia's memory is fragmented. She remembers Matthew standing there looking at her. She remembers wondering if he was going to shoot again, if he was going to make sure she was dead. She remembers her body going into shock, the pain becoming distant and strange. She remembers thinking about her family, about her little sister, about all the things she'd never get to do if she died here. She doesn't remember the moment Matthew turned the gun on himself. She doesn't remember the sound of the fifth shot. Her ears were ringing from the previous 4. Her mind was shutting down from trauma. But at some point, during these 8 minutes, Matthew shot himself in the head. 9:16, 9:25 p.m. Gia becomes aware that Matthew is no longer standing. She can't see him clearly from where she's collapsed on the couch, but she can tell he's on the floor now. She doesn't know if he's dead or unconscious or what. All she knows is that the immediate threat has stopped. He's not shooting anymore. This is when survival instinct kicks in. Gia knows she needs help. She knows she's bleeding badly. She knows if she stays on this couch, she'll die. She has to move. She has to get out of this garage. She has to call for help. Her phone. Where is her phone? She pats her pockets with hands that don't want to work properly. There, in her front pocket. She pulls it out. The screen is cracked, or maybe her vision is blurry. She can't tell. 9:26 to 9:31 p.m. These 6 minutes are Gia dragging herself from the couch to the side door. 6 minutes to travel maybe 12 feet. She can't use her legs. They're dead weight, useless, bleeding, and broken. She uses her arms, pulling herself inch by inch across the concrete garage floor. The pain is indescribable. Every movement sends shocks through her body. The concrete scrapes her arms. Blood trails behind her, a gruesome path marking her progress. She's crying, gasping, making sounds she didn't know she could make. But she keeps moving, because stopping means dying. She reaches the side door. It's locked from the inside, the kind of lock you turn with your hand. Gia reaches up, her arm shaking, and turns the lock. Click. She pushes the door. It opens. Night air hits her face. She pulls herself through the doorway, onto the ground outside. She's out. She's not trapped anymore, but she's still dying. She needs to call someone. She needs help now. 9:32 p.m. Gia calls 911. Her hands are shaking so badly she can barely hit the right buttons. The call connects. A voice answers, professional and calm. The 911 operator. Ma'am, this is the sheriff's office calling back on a recorded line. I have the ambulance on the way to you. Tell me what's happening. Hurry up. I can't feel my legs, please. The operator's voice stays calm, asks questions, tries to keep Gia focused and conscious. Where is the gun? Where is Matthew? Are you alone? Is anyone else hurt? Gia answers as best she can between gasps of pain. She tells them Matthew shot himself. She tells them she can't feel her legs. She tells them please hurry, please, she doesn't want to die. 9:34 p.m. Deputies arrive. 2 minutes after the 911 call, 47 minutes after Gia called Alice for help. Those 47 minutes were the longest of Gia's life, trapped in a garage with a man who wanted to kill her, being shot 4 times, dragging herself to safety, calling for help when no help had come. Alice wasn't there. The person Gia had called at 8:47 p.m., the person who said, "We on our way," arrived at some point in those 47 minutes but not in time to prevent anything. When deputies arrived, Alice was already on scene, but whether she'd been there for minutes or had just arrived was unclear. If Alice had called 911 at 8:47 when Gia first called her, deputies would have arrived around 8:55 p.m. based on response time. 8 minutes instead of 47 minutes. Before any shots were fired. Before Matthew retrieved the gun. Before the argument escalated from words to violence. Would police have been able to de-escalate the situation? Would Matthew have put down the gun when he saw police lights? Would he have surrendered peacefully? Or would police presence have triggered him to start shooting immediately? These are impossible questions. We can't rewrite history. We can only look at what actually happened and note the timing. 8 minutes versus 47 minutes. That's a 39-minute difference. That's the difference between potential prevention and actual tragedy. The 911 call came in at 9:32 p.m. The operator answered to the sound of a woman screaming for help. Ma'am, this is the sheriff's office calling back on a recorded line. I have the ambulance on the way to you. Tell me what's happening. Hurry up. I can't feel my legs. Please. Gia's voice was desperate, terrified, in severe pain. Okay, I have an ambulance coming to you. When did he do this? Please hurry up. Did you just find him like this, or when did he do this? He just did it. Please hurry up. Please hurry, please hurry. Okay, where's the gun? He's on the floor. Please hurry up. Okay, do you have any kids there? No. Listen, the ambulance is coming to you. Okay, please hurry up, please. Okay. Try to take some deep breaths. Okay. Are you there alone? Yes. Okay. What's his name? Matthew, right? Yes. Okay. And you're sure he's not breathing? Yes. He shot himself in the head. Please hurry up. I don't want to die. Okay. Can you go wait out front? I just dragged my body to the front. I don't know what's going on. Please hurry up. Are you hurt? Please hurry up. I don't know. Deputies arrived at 9:34 p.m., 2 minutes after the 911 call, 47 minutes after Gia called Alice for help. The bodycam footage begins with deputies pulling up to the house. It's dark. Residential neighborhood. House lights on. They can hear screaming before they even get out of their vehicle. Deputy Bean approaches the house. He sees a woman in the driveway. She's on the ground. She's covered in blood. She's screaming for help. Ambulance is coming. Who else is in the house? The woman, Gia, is barely coherent. My brother, she says. Though she's confused, she means her boyfriend. Another woman is there, on the lawn. This is Alice Wright, Matthew's sister. She arrived at the scene, though when exactly she arrived and what she saw is something investigators would question later. Step out. Step out, Deputy Bean tells Alice, keeping her away from the scene. Alice is agitated, upset, but something about her demeanor strikes Bean as odd. She's not in shock the way family members usually are when they arrive at a scene like this. She's angry, combative, yelling. Bean focuses on Gia. Where are you shot? My leg, Gia gasps. He shot your leg? Who shot you? He shot me. Okay. Who else is in the house? Nobody. Nobody is in the house. But Bean isn't taking Gia's word for it. The house hasn't been cleared. They don't know if there's someone else inside. They don't know if the shooter is still active. They have to assume the scene is dangerous until they can confirm otherwise. Bean calls for backup. More deputies arrive. They prepare to enter the house and clear it room by room. Standard procedure for a shooting scene. The body cam captures Alice yelling from the lawn. She's angry about something, though what exactly isn't clear from the footage. She wants to go inside. She's arguing with deputies who are telling her to stay back. Stay at the end of the driveway, a deputy tells her firmly. Inside the garage, deputies find Matthew Wright. He's lying on the floor against a wall. There's a gunshot wound to his head. There's blood. He's not responsive. There's agonal breathing, the kind of reflexive gasping that sometimes continues briefly after brain death. Got agonal breathing, one deputy reports. A gun is visible on the floor near Matthew's body. It's positioned on his left side, near a mini bike that's stored in the garage. Matthew is right-handed. This positioning will become important later when Matthew's family starts questioning what happened. Deputies check the rest of the house systematically. Living room clear. Bedrooms clear. Bathrooms clear. Kitchen clear. No one else is inside. It's just Matthew in the garage and Gia outside bleeding in the driveway. Paramedics arrive. They immediately begin working on Gia. She has multiple gunshot wounds. 2 in her leg. 1 in her abdomen. 1 more that investigators are still trying to locate. She's losing blood. She's in shock. But she's conscious, talking, fighting to stay alive. Deputy Bean stays with her, trying to keep her calm while paramedics work. What's your name? Gia. Okay, Gia. I'm Deputy Bean. I'm right here with you. You're going to be okay. Just relax. Just breathe. I can't. Yes, you can. Look at me. Gia. Look at me. Just focus on your breathing. That's all you need to do right now. Just breathe. Bean tries to get information while keeping her stable. Can you tell me what happened? I know you said you guys were arguing. I can't right now. I just want... Gia trails off, overwhelmed by pain and fear. You're all right. You're talking to me. Just relax. Paramedics load Gia into an ambulance. She's taken to the hospital. She will survive her injuries, though recovery will be long and painful. Inside the garage, other paramedics work on Matthew, but there's nothing they can do. The gunshot wound to his head is fatal. He's pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation begins immediately. Detective Conrad arrives to take lead on the case. He starts by walking the scene, documenting everything, trying to understand the physical evidence before making any assumptions about what happened. The garage is small, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet. There's a couch against one wall. There are belongings scattered around, clothes and personal items, consistent with Gia's story about Matthew throwing her stuff in the garage. There's blood on the couch, blood on the floor. Blood trail from the couch to the side door where Gia dragged herself outside. Matthew's body is positioned against the wall opposite the couch. He's lying on his back, arms somewhat outstretched. The gunshot wound is to his right temple. There's significant trauma. Brain matter is visible. Blood has pooled around his head. The gun is on the floor approximately 3 feet from Matthew's body, on his left side near the mini bike. It's a small black semi-automatic pistol. The positioning is unusual for a suicide. Typically, when someone shoots themselves, the gun either remains in their hand or falls very close to the body. 3 feet is farther than expected. Conrad documents this. He photographs the gun from multiple angles. He photographs Matthew's body position. He notes the blood spatter patterns on the walls. He notes the ejected shell casings on the floor. 5 casings total. 4 shots hit Gia. 1 shot killed Matthew. The evidence suggests the sequence was: Matthew shot Gia multiple times while she was on the couch. Gia managed to get off the couch and drag herself to the door. Matthew then turned the gun on himself. But the gun positioning raises questions. How did it end up 3 feet away on his left side when he's right-handed and the wound is on his right temple? There are possible explanations. The gun could have been held in his right hand, but fallen and bounced or slid when he collapsed. The force of his fall could have moved it. Paramedics entering the scene could have accidentally kicked it, but it looks odd. And odd details matter in death investigations. Detective Conrad needs to interview Gia. She's the only living witness to what happened in that garage. But she's in the hospital, in surgery, not stable enough to give a detailed statement. That interview will have to wait. In the meantime, Conrad can interview Alice Wright. She was at the scene when deputies arrived. She's Matthew's sister. She might have information about Matthew's state of mind, about his relationship with Gia, about whether he'd shown signs of being suicidal. The interview with Alice takes place at the sheriff's office 2 days after the shooting. Alice arrives with her mother. They're both upset, both grieving, both angry about what happened to Matthew. Conrad sits down with Alice in an interview room. He explains that they're still investigating, still trying to understand what happened. He needs her help filling in background information about Matthew. I'm not saying I know exactly what happened, Conrad begins carefully. We're still waiting on lab results, medical examiner reports, phone analysis. I'm just trying to get a complete picture. Alice interrupts. I need to know what they ruled his death as, because we have questions. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy, Conrad explains. Their preliminary finding based on the physical evidence and the wound characteristics is consistent with self-inflicted injury. But that's preliminary. They're waiting on toxicology and final reports. That doesn't make sense, Alice says. The gun was on his left side. He's right-handed. How does that work? This is the question that's bothering Matthew's family. The gun positioning doesn't fit their understanding of how suicides work. They're not forensic experts, but they know Matthew was right-handed, and they saw crime scene photos showing the gun on his left. Conrad explains patiently, I understand that looks strange. But when someone falls after shooting themselves, the gun can end up anywhere. It can bounce. It can slide. We also had paramedics and deputies moving through the scene trying to help. Sometimes evidence gets moved accidentally in the chaos of trying to save lives. But nobody tested Gia's hands for gunpowder residue, Alice argued. If they were in close quarters and a gun went off, wouldn't there be residue on both of them? If a gun is fired in an enclosed space like that garage, there's going to be gunshot residue on everyone and everything in that space, Conrad confirms. Residue doesn't tell us who pulled the trigger. It just tells us a gun was fired. What about fingerprints on the gun? Fingerprints are difficult to lift from textured surfaces like gun grips. The guns are being sent to FDLE for testing, but I want to manage your expectations. We might not get usable prints. Alice is frustrated. She feels like the investigation is rushing to conclude that Matthew killed himself without considering other possibilities. I'm not saying Gia shot herself and then shot Matthew, Alice says. That doesn't make sense. But I'm not convinced Matthew did this either. There was someone outside the house that night. Neighbors saw someone standing outside around the time this happened. Why aren't you looking at that? This is the first Conrad has heard about a person outside. Tell me more about that. My neighbors told me they saw someone they didn't recognize standing outside the house that night. Standing there. Not walking. Just standing. Right around the time of the shooting. Don't you think that's suspicious? Conrad makes a note. We did canvass the neighborhood. If someone was outside, they might have heard the argument or the shots and stopped to listen. But we have no evidence anyone entered the garage. The doors were locked until Gia unlocked one from inside. How do you know she was locked in? Alice challenges. She could get out through two different doors. The door to the house and the side door. If someone is preventing you from leaving by standing in front of the doors, even if the doors are technically unlocked, you're effectively trapped, Conrad explains. Alice shakes her head. She's not satisfied with these answers. What about Gia's phone? What did you find on her phone? What provoked this whole thing? We're still analyzing the phones, Conrad says. We have 3 phones being forensically examined. It takes time because we only have one analyst and every case requires phone analysis now. As soon as I have results, I'll know more. So you don't know what Matthew saw that made him snap? Alice presses. Not yet, but I will. The phones will show text messages, call logs, everything. That's going to be crucial to understanding what led up to this. Alice leans back, processing. I just want to know why. If he did this, I want to know what made him do it. What was the trigger? Conrad understands. She's looking for meaning in her brother's death. She wants to believe there was a reason, some specific thing that explains why this happened. Did Matthew have any stressors in his life recently? Conrad asked. Anything that was bothering him that week? Not that I know of. He seemed fine that day. Did he have friends who died recently? Family problems? Job issues? No, nothing like that. What about his relationship with Gia? How was it? They argued sometimes, but it wasn't anything unusual. Just relationship stuff. Did he ever mention that he thought she was cheating? He had before, but nothing serious. He always got over it. Did you ever see evidence of physical abuse? Did he hit her? Alice hesitates. This is a hard question to answer honestly without making her brother look worse. I don't know. I wasn't around them all the time. But the evidence is clear. Gia told investigators Matthew had hit her before this night. She told the 911 operator he was trying to kill her. She told Alice on the phone he was trying to kill her. The pattern of domestic violence is there. The escalation is there. The shooting happened during a domestic argument, where Matthew had already assaulted Gia. Conrad knows from years of investigating domestic violence cases that this scenario is tragically common. Partner becomes jealous and controlling. Arguments escalate to physical violence. One day, the violence escalates to guns. Sometimes the abuser kills the victim. Sometimes the abuser kills the victim, and then themselves. Sometimes the abuser kills themselves after injuring the victim. The medical examiner's preliminary finding that Matthew's death was self-inflicted fits the pattern. Domestic abuser, argument that escalated, shot his girlfriend multiple times, then in either remorse or realization of the consequences, shot himself. But Conrad can't rule anything out yet. He needs the phone analysis. He needs the final medical examiner's report. He needs toxicology results. He needs to build the most complete timeline possible. I'm not closing this case anytime soon, Conrad assures Al. I'm waiting on multiple pieces of evidence. When I have everything, I'll be able to give you better answers. But Alice has one more question, the question that haunts her. Why didn't Gia say anything about someone else being there if there was someone else involved? Conrad considers this. If there was someone else there, if somehow a third person was involved, why would Gia not mention it? She called 911. She talked to paramedics. She talked to deputies at the scene. She gave an interview from the hospital. In none of those interactions did she mention a third person. The simplest explanation is that there was no third person. It was Matthew and Gia alone in that garage. They argued. He shot her. He shot himself. But the gun positioning still bothers the family. And the fact that Alice didn't come when Gia called for help bothers investigators. Because here's the thing that keeps coming back. Gia called Alice at 8:47 p.m. She said, "He's trying to kill me. He has me locked in the garage. Please hurry." Alice said, "Okay, we on our way." But she didn't hurry. She didn't come. She didn't call 911. If Alice had called 911 immediately, if she'd sent police to that house at 8:47 p.m. instead of 47 minutes later when Gia finally called them herself, would Matthew and Gia both still be alive? If police had arrived during the argument, before any shots were fired, could they have de-escalated the situation? Could they have separated Matthew and Gia, calmed things down, prevented the violence? These are impossible questions to answer. We can't know what would have happened if Alice had acted differently, but we know what did happen. We know that for 47 minutes, Gia was alone in that garage with a man who was becoming increasingly violent, and the person she called for help never showed up. Alice's explanation, when pressed about why she didn't come immediately or call police, was vague. She said she was on her way. She said it took time to get. She said she didn't realize it was that serious. But Gia had been explicit. "He's trying to kill me." That's not ambiguous language. That's not hyperbole. That's a direct statement of fear for one's life. Whether Alice truly didn't grasp the seriousness, or whether she dismissed it as drama, or whether she had some other reason for not responding with urgency, the result was the same. Gia was left alone. The phone analysis, when it finally came back, showed the call between Gia and Alice at 8:47 p.m. lasting 1 minute and 43 seconds. It showed Gia's call to 911 at 9:32 p.m., 45 minutes between calls. 2 minutes later, deputies arrived. The phones also revealed the context of the argument. Matthew had been going through Gia's messages. He'd found conversations he interpreted as evidence of cheating, though the messages showed nothing inappropriate. Gia had been texting a male friend. Casual conversation. Nothing romantic or sexual. But to Matthew's jealous mind, any male contact was betrayal. Matthew's search history on his phone showed he'd been researching Gia's activities, looking at her social media, checking her location through phone tracking apps he'd installed without her knowledge. The level of surveillance and control was extreme. The medical examiner's final report confirmed the preliminary finding. Matthew's gunshot wound to the head was consistent with self-inflicted injury. The angle of entry, the powder burns on his skin, the absence of defensive wounds, all pointed to suicide. There was no evidence of struggle or force. He'd held the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. Toxicology came back negative. No alcohol, no drugs. Matthew was sober when he shot Gia and himself. The gun found at the scene was confirmed through ballistics testing to be the weapon that fired all 5 shots. Matthew's fingerprints were on the gun. The gun was registered to a friend of Matthew's who'd sold it to him months earlier. All the evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Domestic argument escalated. Matthew shot Gia 4 times. Then he shot himself once. The case was ruled murder-suicide. Matthew Wright murdered Gia Troutman, attempted murder as she survived, and then committed suicide. But for Gia, knowing the official ruling didn't bring peace. She was physically recovering, but emotionally and psychologically, the trauma was profound. She gave a longer interview to detectives once she was stable enough. She talked about the relationship, about the jealousy, about the times Matthew had hit her before. She talked about that final argument, about calling Alice, about the 47 minutes of terror waiting for help that never came. "When I called Alice, I thought she would save me. I thought she'd call the police or rush over or do something. But she just said okay. Like it was no big deal. Like I wasn't about to die. The detectives asked about those 47 minutes. What exactly happened between the call to Alice and the call to 911? Gia's memory was fragmented, trauma and pain making it hard to piece together a clear timeline. She remembered Matthew becoming colder after the call, more resigned to some plan he'd made. She remembered him retrieving the gun. She remembered the first shot, the shock and pain of realizing he was actually shooting her. She remembered thinking she was going to die. She remembered crawling, dragging herself across the garage floor. Her legs weren't working properly. Everything hurt. She couldn't understand why Matthew had done this. They'd fought before. He'd hit her before. But she never thought he'd try to kill her. She remembered unlocking the side door, pulling herself outside, grabbing her phone and calling 911 because that's what you do when you're dying and no one else is coming to help you. She didn't remember hearing the shot that killed Matthew. She didn't know when exactly he'd turned the gun on himself. She just knew that when deputies arrived, he was already gone. The psychological impact on Gia would last far longer than her physical injuries. She developed PTSD. She had nightmares about the garage, about gunshots, about those 47 minutes of terror. She had panic attacks. She couldn't be in small enclosed spaces without feeling trapped. She was angry at Matthew for what he'd done to her, but she was also angry at Alice. Angry that Alice had said, "I'm on my way," and then never came. Angry that Alice had let 47 minutes pass while Gia fought for her life alone. Alice maintained that she had tried to help, that she'd gotten to the scene as fast as she could, that she'd arrived right before the deputies, but the timeline didn't support that. If Alice had left immediately after Gia's call, she should have arrived at the house by 9 p.m. at the latest. Deputies didn't arrive until 9:34 p.m., and Alice was already there, so she'd arrived sometime in that window, but not immediately. Whether Alice could have prevented what happened if she'd arrived sooner or called police immediately is unknowable. But the fact that she didn't try, that she treated Gia's desperate plea for help as something casual and low priority, added another layer of betrayal to an already traumatic experience. The case officially closed as a murder-suicide. No charges were filed against anyone else because there was no evidence anyone else was criminally involved. Alice's failure to respond urgently to Gia's call was morally questionable, but not illegal. You can't charge someone for not helping, unless they have a specific legal duty to help, which Alice didn't. But the court of public opinion was less forgiving. When details of the case became public, when the Bodycam footage was released, when people heard the recording of Gia calling Alice for help, and Alice responding with indifference, the backlash was immediate. Social media erupted with criticism of Alice. How could she hear someone say, "He's trying to kill me," and not immediately call police? How could she say, "We on our way," and then not actually come? How could she live with herself knowing that her inaction might have contributed to her brother's death and nearly caused Gia's death? Alice responded to the criticism by saying people didn't understand the full situation, that Matthew and Gia argued frequently, and she didn't realize this time was different. But that explanation rang hollow to most people. When someone explicitly says, "He's trying to kill me," the appropriate response is to treat that seriously, not dismiss it as just another argument. Gia survived her gunshot wounds, but survival came with a cost that went far beyond physical scars. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Paramedics had managed to stabilize her enough for transport, but she'd lost significant blood. 2 gunshot wounds to her leg, 1 to her abdomen that had narrowly missed vital organs, a 4th wound that initially went unnoticed in the chaos. She went directly into surgery. The surgeries lasted for hours. Surgeons worked to repair damaged tissue, remove bullet fragments, stop internal bleeding. 1 bullet had shattered bone in her femur and required pins and plates to reconstruct. Another had torn through muscle that would need extensive repair and months of physical therapy to regain function. The abdominal wound was the most concerning, having passed dangerously close to her liver and intestines. She woke up in the ICU the next morning, confused and in pain. Morphine made her thoughts fuzzy. She couldn't immediately remember what had happened. Then it came back in flashes. The garage, the gun, the shots, Matthew, the blood. She asked the nurse if Matthew was okay, then immediately remembered he wasn't, that he'd shot himself, that he was dead. The nurse didn't give details, just said Gia needed to focus on her own recovery right now. Gia spent 2 weeks in the hospital, the first few days in ICU, then moved to a regular room as her condition stabilized. Her family came. Her mother stayed by her bedside almost constantly, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, bringing Gia water. holding her hand during the worst pain. Her father came every day after work. Her little sister visited on weekends, clearly traumatized by seeing Gia so injured, struggling not to cry because she didn't want to make things worse. Friends visited too, bringing flowers and stuffed animals and cards. But the visits were awkward. No one knew what to say. How do you comfort someone who was shot 4 times by their boyfriend? How do you talk about anything normal when something so abnormal has happened? Detectives came to interview Gia when doctors cleared her for questioning. She was still in the hospital, still on pain medication, but coherent enough to give a statement. She walked them through that Thursday night, from the argument to the phone call to Alice to the shooting. She tried to remember every detail, knowing that her testimony would be crucial to understanding what happened. "I don't know why she didn't come," Gia said, talking about Alice. "I told her he was trying to kill me. I told her please hurry, and she just said okay, like I'd asked her to pick up milk from the store, like it wasn't important." The detective taking her statement noted the emotion in Gia's voice when discussing Alice's response. Anger, betrayal, confusion. How do you process the fact that someone you called for help didn't help? Gia also had to process that Matthew was gone. Despite everything he'd done to her, despite the fact that he'd tried to kill her, she'd loved him once. You don't just stop loving someone instantly when they hurt you. Love is complicated and messy, and doesn't follow logical rules. She felt grief mixed with relief mixed with guilt. Grief that the relationship had ended this way. Relief that she'd never have to be afraid of him again. Guilt for feeling relieved that he was dead. A hospital psychologist visited Gia to assess her mental state and provide initial trauma counseling. The psychologist explained that what Gia was feeling was normal, that survivors of domestic violence often experience complicated emotions about their abusers. She arranged for Gia to continue therapy after discharge. After 2 weeks, Gia was discharged from the hospital. She went to her parents' house, not back to the house she'd shared with Matthew. She couldn't go back there. She never wanted to see that garage again. Her physical recovery was slow and painful. She needed help with basic tasks at first. Her legs were weak, still healing from the bullet wounds and the surgeries. She couldn't walk without crutches for the first month. She did physical therapy 3 times a week, exercises that hurt but were necessary to regain strength and mobility. The physical scars were visible reminders. Surgical scars from where doctors had operated. Entry and exit wound scars from the bullets. She'd always have these scars. Always have physical evidence of that night marked on her body. But the psychological scars were worse. She developed PTSD, formally diagnosed by her therapist. She had nightmares about the garage, about gunshots, about those 47 minutes. She'd wake up screaming, thinking she was back there, back on that couch being shot. She couldn't be in small enclosed spaces without panicking. Garages were obviously triggering, but so were closets, bathrooms, any room without a clear exit. She'd have panic attacks, hyperventilating, feeling like she couldn't breathe, feeling trapped even when she wasn't. Loud noises sent her into immediate fear response. A car backfiring, a door slamming, fireworks. Anything that sounded remotely like a gunshot would trigger her. She'd freeze, unable to move, unable to think, just pure fear flooding her system. She had trouble trusting people. If someone said, "I'll be there," she didn't believe them. If someone promised to help, she expected them not to follow through. Alice had said, "We on our way," and hadn't come. How could Gia trust anyone's word after that? Therapy helped, but recovery from trauma isn't linear. Some days were better than others. Some days she could function almost normally, go to physical therapy, talk to her family without breaking down, even laugh at something funny on TV. Other days she couldn't get out of bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't shake the feeling that she was still in danger. 3 months after the shooting, Gia testified at a coroner's inquest regarding Matthew's death. Florida law requires inquests for certain types of deaths to establish official cause and manner. Gia had to sit in a courtroom and describe what happened, knowing Matthew's family was there listening. Alice was there. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Alice looked away first. They hadn't spoken since that night. Gia had questions for Alice. Why didn't you come? Why didn't you call 911? Did you not believe me? Did you not care? But she never got to ask those questions. Alice left immediately after the inquest concluded. The inquest officially ruled Matthew's death a suicide. Combined with the attempted murder of Gia, the case was closed as a murder-suicide. Matthew had shot Gia 4 times, then shot himself once. The evidence supported this conclusion. The medical examiner's report confirmed it. The physical evidence at the scene matched it. Matthew's family struggled with this ruling. They wanted to believe Matthew wouldn't do something like they wanted to find another explanation. They raised questions about the gun positioning, about whether someone else could have been involved, but ultimately, the evidence was overwhelming. Matthew had done this. The case became public when local news reported on it. Domestic violence incident ends in shooting suicide, read the headline. Gia's name was initially withheld as a victim of domestic violence, but once she started speaking publicly about her experience, the media identified her. The bodycam footage was released months later through a public records request. Someone posted it online. It went viral. Millions of people watched deputies arrive at the scene, watched Gia bleeding on the ground, watched the chaos and trauma of that night. Public reaction was intense. People were outraged by Alice's failure to help. Social media erupted with criticism. How could she hear someone say, "He's trying to kill me," and not immediately call 911? How could she say, "We on our way," and then not come? Alice received death threats. People found her social media accounts and flooded them with hateful messages. "You let your brother kill someone. You could have saved them both. You're as guilty as he is." It got bad enough that Alice had to delete her social media presence entirely. She moved out of the area. She refused to give media interviews. She became a pariah, the person who promised help and didn't deliver. But was it fair to blame Alice entirely? This question divided people. Some argued yes, absolutely fair. When someone explicitly tells you they fear for their life, you call 911 immediately. You don't wait. You don't assess whether they're being dramatic. You take the threat seriously. Alice's failure to act contributed to the tragedy. Even if she couldn't have prevented Matthew's suicide, she could have potentially gotten help to Gia before she was shot. Others argued the blame was complicated. Alice wasn't the one who shot anyone. Matthew made the choice to be violent. Matthew pulled the trigger. Blaming Alice lets Matthew off the hook for his own actions. And maybe Alice genuinely didn't grasp the severity, genuinely thought this was just another argument she could mediate, genuinely didn't realize her brother was capable of attempted murder. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Alice bears some responsibility for not responding urgently to a clear cry for help. But Matthew bears the ultimate responsibility for his own violent actions. Domestic violence advocates used the case to push for policy changes. They wanted laws requiring bystanders who receive information about imminent danger to report it to authorities, similar to mandatory reporting laws for child abuse or elder abuse. The proposed Alice's Law would make it a misdemeanor to receive information that someone is in immediate danger and fail to call 911 or emergency services. It would create a legal duty to help in extreme circumstances like Gia's call to Alice. The law faced opposition from civil liberties groups who argued it was unenforceable and potentially criminalized people for not acting perfectly in crisis situations. If your friend calls crying about a breakup and says, "I'm going to kill him," are you required to call police? How do you determine what's a real threat versus emotional hyperbole? The law never passed, but the debate it sparked was valuable. It forced conversations about bystander responsibility, about what we owe to people who ask us for help, about how to respond to domestic violence disclosures. Training programs for domestic violence awareness started using Gia's case as a teaching example. When someone tells you they're afraid, believe them. When someone asks for help, help them. Don't minimize. Don't dismiss. Don't assume they're exaggerating. Call for professional help immediately. Gia herself became an advocate. Once she was physically and emotionally stable enough, she started speaking publicly about her experience. She gave interviews to local news. She spoke at domestic violence awareness events. She partnered with organizations that help abuse survivors escape dangerous situations. Her message was consistent. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your relationship, it probably is. Jealousy isn't love. Control isn't care. Someone who hits you once will hit you again. And most importantly, when you need help, call 911 yourself. Don't rely on others to help you when your life is at stake. She also spoke about those 47 minutes specifically. "I waited for help that never came. I thought his sister would save me, but she didn't. And I almost died because I waited instead of calling 911 immediately myself." This resonated with abuse survivors who'd made similar mistakes, trusting the wrong people, waiting for rescue instead of rescuing themselves. Gia's story became a cautionary tale and simultaneously a story of survival. She was alive. She was healing. She was using her experience to help others. That was powerful. But she also acknowledged the ongoing struggle. "People ask if I'm okay now, if I'm recovered," she said in one interview. "And I don't know how to answer that. Physically, I'm healing. But mentally, emotionally, I don't think you ever fully recover from something like this. You just learn to live with it. The physical scars would always be there. The bullet wounds, the surgical scars, visible reminders of the worst night of her life. The psychological scars would always be there too. The PTSD, the nightmares, the triggers, the fear that never fully goes away. But Gia was determined to build a life anyway. She moved into her own apartment, her first time living alone. She adopted a dog for companionship and emotional support. She started taking online college classes, working toward a degree in social work, wanting to help other domestic violence survivors. She went on a few dates eventually, though trusting someone romantically again was difficult. How do you open yourself to love when love almost killed you? She was working on it in therapy, taking it slow, setting strong boundaries, paying attention to red flags she'd missed with Matthew. Her family remained supportive. Her mother still called every day to check on her. Her sister visited regularly. Her father helped her move into her apartment, assembled her furniture, installed extra locks on her doors because he knew she needed to feel safe. 1 year after the shooting, Gia returned to the house she'd shared with Matthew, not to live there, but to face it. Her therapist had suggested it might help with closure. The house had new owners now, a family who knew its history, but bought it anyway because the price was good. Gia stood in the driveway where deputies had found her bleeding. She walked to the side of the garage where she'd dragged herself out that door. She didn't go inside. She didn't need to. She just needed to see it, and know that she'd survived it. "This is where it happened," she said quietly. "This is where I thought I would die, but I didn't. I'm still here." That's the message she wants people to understand. You can survive the unimaginable. You can live through trauma that should have killed you. You can rebuild even when everything is broken. But you shouldn't have to. That's the other part of her message. No one should have to survive domestic violence. No one should have to be shot 4 times by someone they loved. No one should have to drag themselves bleeding across a garage floor calling for help. Prevention is better than survival. Leaving at the first sign of abuse is better than hoping it gets better. Calling 911 yourself is better than waiting for someone else to help you. Matthew's family never publicly acknowledged responsibility for his actions. They continued to question the official findings, to suggest there was more to the story, to imply that Gia somehow contributed to what happened. This is common in domestic violence cases. Families of abusers often can't accept that their loved one was capable of such violence. They look for alternative explanations. They blame the victim. They minimize the abuse. But the evidence doesn't lie. Matthew shot Gia 4 times. That's documented. That's fact. Whether he intended to kill her or just hurt her, whether he planned it or snapped in the moment, whether he had mental health issues or trauma from his past, none of that excuses pulling a trigger 4 times. Alice never apologized to Gia. Never explained why she didn't come or call 911. Never acknowledged that her inaction contributed to the tragedy. She just disappeared from public view, moved away, tried to forget it ever happened. But Gia can't forget. She carries it with her every day, in her scars, in her nightmares, in her jumpiness around loud noises, in her difficulty trusting people, in her advocacy work helping other survivors. She turned her trauma into purpose. That's survival. That's resilience. That's taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and using it to help prevent the same thing from happening to others. 2 years after the shooting, Gia completed her degree in social work. She got a job at a domestic violence shelter, working directly with women escaping abusive situations. She helps them safety plan. She helps them find resources. She helps them understand they're not alone. And when they ask her if she really understands what they're going through, she can say yes. She can show her scars. She can tell her story. She can prove that survival is possible. That's the legacy of those 47 minutes. Not just tragedy, not just trauma, but also resilience, also advocacy, also a survivor who refused to let violence define her entire life. Gia is more than what happened to her. She's more than a victim. She's a survivor, an advocate, a person rebuilding her life piece by piece, day by day, with scars that tell a story of both horror and survival. She trusted the wrong person when she called Alice for help. But she saved herself when she dragged herself to that door and called 911. That's the part of the story Gia focuses on now. Not the betrayal, not the abandonment, but the fact that when rescue didn't come, she rescued herself. "I waited 47 minutes for help," Gia says. "But in the end, I was the help. I got myself out. I got myself to safety. I called for the right help, and I survived." That's the message for anyone in a dangerous situation. Don't wait for rescue. Rescue yourself. Call 911. Leave. Run. Fight. Do whatever you have to do to survive. Because sometimes, the person you're waiting for won't come. And those minutes you spend waiting could be the difference between life and death. 47 minutes. That's how long Gia waited for Alice. That's how long she endured unimaginable terror and pain. That's how long before she finally called for the help that actually came. Learn from her mistake. Don't wait. Don't trust promises from people who might not follow through. When you're in danger, when someone is threatening you, when you fear for your life, call 911 immediately. That's who will actually come. That's who will actually help. Gia survived those 47 minutes. Many domestic violence victims don't. She's using her survival to amplify their voices, to honor their memories, to fight for a world where no one has to endure what she endured. She trusted the wrong person, but she became the right person for others in similar situations. That's transformation. That's purpose born from. The case is closed officially. Murder-suicide. Matthew Wright attempted to murder Gia Troutman, then committed suicide. That's the official record. That's what the evidence shows. That's what happened. But for Gia, the case will never be fully closed. She lives with it every day. The physical scars, the emotional scars, the memories she can't erase, the 47 minutes that changed everything. All she can do is move forward, heal as much as possible, help others, tell her story, and remind people that when someone says, "He's trying to kill me," you call 911 immediately, because 47 minutes is too long to wait. And sometimes, no one has 47 minutes left to wait. Some people speculated that Alice didn't believe Gia, that she thought Gia was being dramatic, exaggerating, trying to manipulate her into taking sides against Matthew, that maybe Alice had a history of Gia calling with complaints about Matthew, and this time she just didn't want to deal with it. Others speculated that Alice didn't want to get her brother in trouble, that calling police might result in Matthew being arrested for domestic violence, and family loyalty made her hesitate to involve law enforcement. Still others thought maybe Alice was afraid of Matthew herself, that maybe she knew he was dangerous when angry and didn't want to put herself in the middle of a violent situation. None of these explanations excuse the failure to help, but they attempt to understand it. Because the alternative, that Alice simply didn't care, is too disturbing for most people to accept. The Bodycam footage became widely circulated online. People watched deputies arrive at the scene. They watched Gia bleeding on the ground, begging for help. They watched paramedics work frantically to save her. They watched the chaos and trauma of a domestic violence scene gone horribly wrong. And they asked, how many other situations like this happen every day? How many times does someone call a friend or family member for help and get dismissed? How many times does someone say, "He's going to hurt me," and the response is, "You're overreacting"? Domestic violence advocates use the case to highlight the importance of taking threats seriously. When someone says they're in danger, believe them. Don't assume it's drama. Don't assume they're exaggerating. Don't assume they can handle it themselves. Call for help. Call 911. Do something. Because 47 minutes can mean the difference between life and death. And sometimes, the person who says, "I'm on my way," never actually comes. Gia survived her gunshot wound. She went through multiple surgeries. She spent weeks in the hospital. She had months of physical therapy to regain function in her life. She has permanent scarring. Physical reminders of the night her boyfriend tried to kill her. But she survived. Unlike Matthew, unlike the thousands of other domestic violence victims who don't survive, who don't get the chance to tell their stories, whose murders are ruled as tragic outcomes of domestic disputes, and then filed away. Gia speaks now about her experience. She talks about the warning signs of domestic violence, the jealousy, the control, the isolation, the escalation from emotional abuse to physical abuse to attempted murder. She talks about how she thought she could fix him, how she thought her love would be enough to make him change. And she talks about that phone call to Alice, about begging for help and being told okay in a voice that said, "I don't really care," about waiting for rescue that never came, about realizing she was completely alone in the worst moment of her life. She wants people to understand. When someone asks for help, help them. Don't dismiss it. Don't minimize it. Don't assume they're being dramatic. Just help. Call 911 if nothing else. Make that call. Because 47 minutes might be all the time they have left. Matthew's family still questions the official ruling. They still think there's something off about the gun positioning, about the sequence of events, about whether Matthew really killed himself, or whether something else happened. But all the evidence points to murder-suicide. And while it's understandable that family members don't want to believe their loved one was capable of such violence, the evidence doesn't lie. Matthew shot Gia 4 times. Then he shot himself. The medical examiner confirmed it. The ballistics confirmed it. The physical evidence confirmed it. The only real question is, Could it have been prevented? If Alice had called 911 immediately when Gia called her at 8:47 p.m., would police have arrived in time to stop Matthew from shooting anyone? We'll never know. We only know what did happen. 47 minutes of terror, 4 gunshots, 1 death, 1 survivor, and 1 person who said she was on her way, but never came. Pay attention to who you call when you're in. Pay attention to who responds with urgency and who responds with indifference. Pay attention to who treats your fear as valid and who dismisses it as drama. Because when seconds matter, when your life is at stake, the person who says okay without meaning it, the person who promises help but doesn't deliver, that person might as well not exist. Gia called for help. She trusted Alice to hear the desperation in her voice and respond accordingly. That trust was misplaced. And in those 47 minutes between her call to Alice and her call to 911, Gia learned a devastating lesson. Sometimes you can only save yourself. She trusted the wrong person, and she almost paid for it with her life.